Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Unfucked by Design podcast. Jackson, your host, and as a product designer and product strategist, I spent a big part of my career helping the wrong people to make a shitload of money. And recently I've decided that enough is enough. It's time that I started to give back and maybe even undo some of the damage that I've helped to create. If you're a designer, entrepreneur, or creative visionary looking to do the same, then this is a podcast for you. In this episode, I speak to Tamara Adlin. Tamara is a renowned expert in the field of user experience design. She's an author, speaker, and in her words, a master of corporate unclusterfucking. Some of the topics we discuss include UX design for Web3, hype cycles, and lessons learned from the experience, similarities between Web3 and today's AI narrative, how much a designer should know about your industry before you hire them, hacks for aligning your team on measurable design goals, co-creation with AI, and much, much more. Timestamps are in the description. Really love this conversation with Tamra, and thank you for listening. So welcome, Tamra, and thanks for joining.
Delighted to be here. Thanks.
Nice to meet you.
I'm excited.
What I'm going to do, just for the sake of this conversation, I'm going to start by reading out our vision statement, which has been evolving. This is number 3 of our official podcast episodes, right? And so this has been, each time we do, I'm sort of realizing a little bit more about ourselves and what we're trying to accomplish. And so currently the vision statement is empowering creative visionaries to build a better future by design. In this podcast, we'll explore design techniques, share insights from industry experts, and sharpen our methods of remote collaboration. If you're a designer, entrepreneur, or innovative thinker looking to contribute to society in a meaningful way, this podcast is for you. So just to set the scene a little bit, sort of frame where we're going with this, I think that's helpful. I also, spoke to you earlier about the topic of, and this is where we sort of landed, was how much does a designer need to know in order to join a team? And I thought that was really interesting in a previous conversation we had. I thought that could be a nice theme to cover in this episode in terms of something that people might walk away from and learn, designers and creative entrepreneurs. I think that's a penny dropping moment, that we talked about the position descriptions that people write, trying to find designers for their teams. And so everything up until now, I think, is an introduction that we'll spin back on and revisit. But for now, what drives you? Tell us a little bit about what excites you. What's your mission?
My mission? Okay. And then we can absolutely, I'd love to talk about job descriptions and some fresh and bitchy ways to think about those. I think what drives me is I like to try to make things make sense. I think I like the process of translating, and I really love great analogies and being able to come up with sort of aha moments with people. And technology is a great place to work if you want to try to do that. It's also a very frustrating place to work. And so, I stumbled into UX before UX was a field and ended up staying and loving it. And I was at Amazon for a few years after I got my master's. And then in 2005, when the first book came out, I started consulting, focusing on really early stage startups because that's where all my friends were. And that's just given me a unique perspective over the years, having started with something as data-driven as sort of traditional personas were, which I've never done since, but then focusing on early stage startups where the pressures and the speed and the creativity is of a different kind, and there's different sort of motivators behind the people who start startups. And just looking at those and just starting to have these sort of really interesting moments of how do you help creative people get out of their own way without being super annoying or quashing the energy they have behind what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
So that's what's, I think we all in the user experience world, one of the big challenges is we have to make ourselves as products usable. And so that's sort of been a career-long thing for me, is how do I make myself usable to my customers and my users and people who listen to my talks and stuff like that. And I think that's what really drives me.
Yeah. Well, 25 plus years, I think your LinkedIn said I think back then, because when I got into UX, there was not a thing, right? This is before before the iPhone came along, and all of a sudden everyone needed UX, right? User experience
Paperboard.
design. There's like we used to call it a bunch of different names. Usability was a thing, but it
Yeah.
was more information architecture and
I think
web, web
usability was
design.
web design. Well, usability was one of the first things. So my degree program at University of Washington here in Seattle in the United States is now called Human-Centered Design and Engineering. When I got into it, it was called technical communication because it was really the field of technical writing growing into the
Mhm.
world of hyperlinks and hypercard and all of that stuff. And when I
Wow.
graduated in 1996, it was funny to me that all of these companies were starting to realize they needed this quote unquote usability thing. And so there were all these job descriptions for people with like 5 to 10 years worth of experience in usability. And my response was there's like 4 of those on the planet. So I don't know what all these companies are thinking, trying to get people with all this experience. Of course, since then, our discipline, our world, the whole tech world has exploded. And we have a whole new vocabulary and
Mm.
taxonomy around the things that we do. But I think the same things apply now. People want what we do, but they don't know how to ask for it, which is one of the reasons we had such an interesting conversation about job descriptions
Yeah,
and designers.
because it's still a challenge, right? And that's
Yeah.
I think I've gotten to know some recruiters closely that I would call friends over the years now, and really, yeah, the problem it's forever present. you know, these big giant requests for people that have 3+ or 5+ years in an industry or in a segment of an industry that didn't exist 2 years ago.
Yeah. Well,
It's
and the
really
aha
tricky.
moment, the sort of you can't unsee it moment that I had with that is that, when you're inside a company and you're trying to create a job description, literally the words that I would hear people use are, can somebody throw together a job description? And
Mhm.
that's really what you would do is like you would patch together a job description out of other job descriptions and blah, 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 and throw it
I
up
mean,
there. Meanwhile, on the other side of that picture, we as potential employees look at these job descriptions as if every word was like come directly from the mouth of God. And that, if we don't exactly fit what we're looking for, that's an indicator that we're not good enough. What we really should do is say, I wrote this article called How to Copy and Paste Yourself into Your Dream Job. And I call job descriptions big dumb bullies. They're just dumb, right? And we look at them and there's also a lot of data about women versus men. Women will look at a job description and see one bullet point that she does not qualify for and she will not apply. Men will tend to look at job descriptions and see one bullet point they do qualify for and they will apply.
Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's from a Harvard review. But anyway, we look at them and just think of yourself looking at a job description. You're like, oh God, well, they say they want 2 to 5, but I only have 1.4. And oh, I haven't done all. And I think it's dumb. I think we should break them down and use them for parts. So what I suggest people do is create the spreadsheet where they put in a first column all the things, literally copy and paste the things that you do qualify for.
yeah.
And then there's 3 different columns for no, because we all say no and we think we put a big period at the end of that sentence. There's 3 different kinds of no. There's
Mhm.
4 different kinds actually. One is no, but I could be good enough at this in 2 weeks and 2 books. Right? If somebody
Yeah,
asks
for sure.
me to do really, really basic SEO, like super basic SEO, just to like a little bit of it, 2 weeks and 2 books, given my experience, I could probably make a dent in it.
Yeah.
Then there's not now, but 4 to 6 months, because we forget that when we're in a job or looking for a job, we feel zero energy around learning things. But once we get out, if we had 4 to 6 months to learn something, we could learn it. Maybe, and then the third one is not yet, but maybe a few years. Like, no, I don't manage people yet, but maybe, I'm aiming towards that. And the last one is fuck no. Like, for example, they want a designer who also codes in Ruby on Rails. Fuck no. I don't. I never will. There's a reason I don't. Right.
Yeah.
So we separate out those responses into 4 different kinds of no. 2 weeks and 2 books, 4 to 6 months, 2 or 3 years, like a big goal.
Mm.
And fuck no. And it helps us look at these descriptions in a whole nother way and helps us realize another really important point, which is the people who write job descriptions have a problem. They don't necessarily know how to solve it.
No.
So job descriptions are the description of a solution they think
Wow, yeah.
would
Yeah.
solve a problem.
Mhm.
It's not true. And I'm babbling on a bit here. My friend Phil Terry You can go to phyl.org to see this. He wrote a book called Never Search Alone. And one of his processes during job negotiations is that you write the OKRs, the objectives and key results for the position, while you're interviewing, because you actually know better as a professional
Yeah.
what they should be. And if you write them and they don't jive with what the hiring manager wants, then you know it's not a good position for you. If they do, then suddenly you've put yourself in this amazing position to negotiate because you're already solving their problems. I'll stop there because I can
No,
go
no,
on.
no, don't look. Honestly, this is great stuff. And this is, I've been through this very recently, with a number of, clients and teams. And it's a repeat issue that there's so many moving parts in there, right? Like it depends on the stage that the company is in terms of scaling, depends on, what their relationship is with their hiring team or their HR resources. There's so many different parts to it, right? I think I'm really, really curious to continue taking this conversation further, even on other calls, what are the solutions? How do you've come up with one, which is to, critique the position description in a productive way. You mentioned the spreadsheet. The thing is for a junior and a mid-level, I think that's really, really fantastic. I wonder if it's somewhat different for more senior roles, just because because then it seems to, and I've probably seen this a few times, there's more of a lean on the C-suite for the selection of those individuals because they are quite costly hires to make. And so then it comes down to the perception of C-suite as to what that role should be, And so is it then that is placing the prerequisite of, 3 years of experience in this vertical market in order to qualify, right? Which is incredibly narrowing, right? Like it's taking this huge funnel of potential candidates and narrowing it already down to maybe 3 people in the world.
Yeah.
And then I find that what I've seen happen in the past is they will then, because they're not getting the response that they like, they just raise the salary. They just pump it up to 200K or, 220K, something crazy like that. Right. And then you'll have people that maybe fit the technical requirements, shift themselves more into the design role. You know what I mean? So they'll push themselves and that's like, yeah, hell yeah, I'll take 220K for sure. I'm confident. I'm a designer. I've got this. I build products. It's a really tricky and sticky problem, which
Well, I have big opinions about this, which I'm sure you're going to be shocked to hear that I have big opinions about anything.
love it. That's what you're here for. Hit us.
Right. So as a consultant, I have a big opinion about this. So I come in and usually I'm recommended in, which makes a huge difference. So if you want to get a job as a senior person, the very best way you can do that is to get other people to suggest you, just like suggesting you as a speaker or anything like that. So making relationships, Phil also suggests this. Get Never Search Alone by Phil, phyl.org. And then he sets up these job search councils. It's just an amazing free resource. It's unbelievable. And I'm a huge proponent of it. I host some of the LinkedIn Live things for it. Anyway, as a consultant, I come in and I try to figure out what the real problem is because they say, oh, we want personas, for example. And I've had lots of people call me wanting personas. The first thing I tell them is I do personas in a really different way than anybody else. I don't do data. And I say, what problem are you trying to solve? And I swear to God, within 10 minutes, we're talking about how the CMO and the CTO can't stand to be in the same room together. That's the kind of problem C-level people are trying to solve when they hire another C-level person.
Yeah.
And it's never going to help just to add another voice into that problem space. That's like adding another dog into a fight, right? It's not going to help. So understanding the real problem which is why so many persona efforts fail, by the way, is because they're not being data doesn't solve problems in organizations. That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah.
But so your question was like, how should I approach going into conversations about senior roles? And I think what you do is you go in as a consultant pretending you're trying to help them determine what the solution is, whether or not it's you. So
Yeah.
you say, I see you've described this way. If they aren't ready to say, if they can't, I mean, sometimes they can't articulate what problems they're trying to solve for whatever reason, maybe because they don't want to admit that it's a CMO, CTO who hate each other,
Yeah.
maybe for other reason. If they can't answer that, then I ask them, in 6 months, if you hire the right person, what numbers will have changed by how much? Actually, that's the way I think job descriptions should be written. If we hire the right person, in 6 months, these numbers will have changed by this much. And I think it should be 10 of those, and that every applicant should say, here's how I could nail it for 3 of them. That's my opinion. I also think people should give out birthday presents on their own birthday, because then you get surprise birthday presents. And you don't have to remember everybody else's birthday.
Yeah.
So take it with a grain of salt. But I still think that's the way you go in as a candidate. You say, can you tell me the problems you're trying to solve? Or can you tell me, if you hire the right person, what will have changed by how much in 6 months? Then you, as a design person, a research person, whatever, you turn on your professional spidey sense, not your I want a job spidey sense.
Yeah.
You turn it on and say, what is their real problem?
Yeah.
How are they trying to solve it? How does that indicate how they're thinking in the wrong way? And how could I start to address that now? Right. And the way I've done this in my consultation, like pitch calls, is I end up saying things like, listen, if we never talk again, here's the 3 things I suggest you do tomorrow. Right. And that can be powerful in a job conversation too, because also in a senior role, you have to make sure that you're taking a job where you can actually do the work you love doing not catch a falling knife.
Yeah. And this is the challenge. I think for me as a consultant, I've never, I've built a successful consultancy where I had, direct access to the C-suite, and got good at being conscious and made great use of their time and with the short availability that they could give me. But when I accepted a full-time role as an experiment, it was a completely different scenario, right? Like I was blocked by middle management and couldn't actually get access to the C-suite. Now, as a designer, I find, well, it's the same with any role, right? You're only as good as the information that you can access, right? Like you can only produce with what you're given.
And you're only as good as the title you have. That's the other thing I tell people in startups. You're going to hear a lot of times, well, we don't have a hierarchy here, which really means we're just giant pussies and haven't decided how we want it to be yet. And so I say, well, if that's the case,
in Web3.
If that's the case, then give me the VP title, because who cares? If you don't care. But if you don't, this is the big problem with women too, because I coach women on this. They often will cave on the title, but then and get the money or something. But if you come in with the wrong title, you have shot yourself in the foot.
Yeah.
Because you're at the wrong political level to do your work. And it does matter.
Yeah. Isn't that funny, Dave? This is like, so my recent experience, right? I've come out of this and gone, and this is where I'm trying to find the tone with this podcast, right? Because I'm going to talk about a personal experience now. I'm not going to mention any names, but I have recently decided that I'm coming back to consultancy. Number one, I can make much more money. Number two, it's so much more rewarding with the people I have access to. And 3, like you said, I'm invited to the table. I don't have to fight to get a seat, right?
I call us UX vampires. We have to be invited in.
Yeah. So anyway, but it's funny to hear you say this, right? Because I took this recent title, I was poached, and they dangled the carrot like, here, man, we're going to offer you this money. You want to come along? I'm like, okay. Right. And then when I get in there, I was like, I've got a position description, not a position description, never had one. Right. But I had a contract with a role title. Right. So it's lead product designer, a lead designer, I think it was. Anyway, so I've gotten in the door and, for the first couple of weeks while I'm onboarding, I'm trying to say, hey, look, I'm going to just listen in and try and help get some runs on the board, results and conversations, just be fly on the wall and find my position in this company. And then I was invited to management meeting as well, which implied that I was, of that level and going to be introduced to these conversations. And one day I said on this call, because somebody on this call kept on referring to me as a UI designer. It's like, so glad that we've got such a brilliant UI designer here. So I'm just like, oh, look, there's a very senior person in the company, in the org. Someone was supposedly answering direct to. And so I was like, at some point, I was like, look, I'm listening up. Guys, look, I have to interrupt you here. I keep on hearing UI designer here. I feel like maybe I need to get off this call and just draft a position description. Do you mind if I do that? It's only going to take me 15 minutes. I'm just going to bullet point it up and I'll give it back to you and you can tell me if I'm on the right track, right? Anyway, drafted it up, sent it back, radio silence, nothing back. So anyway, I left it for a day and then I picked up the phone and called the, my manager. And it's like, hey, look, just wondering if you had a chance to run your eyes over this. He's like, you're overthinking it. Overthinking it. Just get on with it and do the job. What you did in your job interview, I want more of that. And I'm like,
what did you do in your job interview to get that?
I ran like a little requirements gathering exercise, right? Like, I drafted a quick proto persona and did an end-to-end customer journey for an onboarding experience. Really, really quick. Like it was indicative of the thinking. That's it. Because I was invited for the role. And so, it was like, hey, look, what are you going to do when you get here? So I showed them that. And anyway, so I was like, yeah, you're overthinking it. And then, then I got an email a couple of days later because I was working on process stuff just to be able to get the right information to be able to get the job done as a designer, because of building out and fleshing out a design team. So getting communication is really right. It's very foundational stuff, right? And then I get an email a couple of days later from the manager who I was transferred to after that, who said that I was the role in my contract. Needless to say, I only lasted here just shy of 2.5 months, right? After 6 weeks, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this another few weeks. My alarm bells are going off seriously badly here. And they get this email saying, the role title in my contract was just an acknowledgement of my seniority and that they are a flat structure and that everybody is a design lead.
Okay. So with this never search alone thing, the only thing that happened wrong in that scenario is that you didn't write that job description before you took the role. Right?
Yeah.
Like we have too much trust that anytime there's any kind of language that could be misconstrued, it will be misconstrued. Like the word user
Yeah.
will be. And so lead designer means different things to different people. And they obviously define it differently than you did.
Mm.
So I think taking ownership of ourselves as a product and our own expertise, even in defining the roles that we're applying for or interested in, is a really important thing to do. And it sets you off with the right foot also, because you're then saying, like if they had seen that job description, I'm not trying to harp on you. I'm just saying.
No. This is not. No, please keep going. Because this is really.
And at some point I have to tell the funny story about our COVID experience too.
Is that when you mentioned, Tamara, about you make yourself usable?
Yes.
Like when you're going through this process. So that was really interesting concept to me. Can you just elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yes, I can a lot. So we don't necessarily, so our users, as a user experience or design person, our users in an organization, once we're already hired, are people like technology people, they're executives, and so one artifact is not going to be usable to all of those people, right? And so what ends up happening, let's say just with design, right, that you may end up doing wireframes and you may end up doing visual designs and all of those things. Well, executives look at them as an opportunity to rip them to shreds and say that you didn't understand what they wanted, when in reality, it's the first time they're able to think through it clearly because it's the first time they're seeing it instead of imagining it.
Yep.
Versus tech looks at those as an opportunity to complain first right? Or something. They look at them like, think about the eyeballs that are being cast on these artifacts that you're creating.
Mm.
And you too are that way, right? And so if you think about, I think during the application process or trying to find a job, it's not just about making yourself usable. It's about making your strengths palpable and setting the expectations for the kinds of questions that you're going to ask. So people call me about personas and I end up telling them, I'm going to be spending most of my time helping you hone measurable business goals within set time periods.
Mm.
And they're like, what? In fact, they all tell me to take that out of my proposals. And I'm like, fine, send me your measurable goals. Which numbers do you have to change by how much in what time period?
Yep.
Right. And I will take it out of my contract. And every single time it's the same thing. Yeah, we'll send them over. Bob, did you have the last version of those? Or wait, Jillian, you were working on the investor deck? Where's the board deck that they don't exist because I say this all the time. Every time more than two important people get together in a room, something shifts and no one writes it down. And it is politically impossible, especially in a male-dominated corporate world, for males to raise their hand in a meeting with their peers and say, I'm not sure I know what our business goals are anymore.
Yeah.
Not going to happen. So what I have to make clear very early on is that I cannot do my work unless we clarify these measurable goals. And then I can deliver just about anything if I know what you want, right? I mean, if you want something to increase by 150%, I may not be able to do that, but I can tell you in the beginning that you can only expect 20%.
Do you help them to set those measurable goals though? This is that. Yeah.
Great question. Yes, because they don't know how to do it. So I always say in my contracts, we'll articulate your measurable goals, right? The truth is I always draft them. You have to be careful when you're doing stuff like this because you don't want to upset people. So what I do instead is I show my belly and I say, after listening to you guys for a while, here's what I think I'm hearing. I'm sure I need course correction.
Yeah.
But does this kind of line up with what you're saying? Then they have a common enemy, quote unquote enemy, where I'm the poor person who doesn't understand what they're saying, right?
Yeah.
And then they can converse amongst themselves about how wrong I am about saying it should be 20%. And then one of them will say it only needs to be 2%. And the other one will say it needs to be 80%. And suddenly they're having a conversation that they needed to have all along.
That's right.
They needed to have.
Yeah. Now because I have my hacks on getting that alignment. Usually I find, what I've found recently is it's much easier I've had better experience with getting that alignment on goals as an agency or a consultant coming in to execute on a specific goal, right? And it's like, we know we have a problem and we need somebody to help us deliver on a solution to that problem. Well, they think they know they have a problem, right? It's much easier for me to, in that point, go, okay, look, and generally speaking, I'll try and have the decision maker in a session where I will come with my drafts of what I believe that the challenge and the goals to be, but then I'll get everyone talking about it together and have the decision maker actually give the final vote on what it is. So at least it's actually lodged, it's done, it's like, hey, look, this is better than having nothing, right? And look, hey, we could be wrong, right? This could be the wrong goal, the wrong problem to solve, but we need to align on what it is we're going to try and solve for now,
100%.
And have a scope in terms of time and energy.
And I think if designers refuse to do a lick of work until and unless they have some measurable goal, their lives would change.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's
how do you even
in user experience.
What was that?
How do you even approach that?
Well, what you approach that is, so the wonderful thing about business goals, they don't exist, but it's never inappropriate to ask for them. Nobody can tell you you're an asshole for asking for business goals.
No.
But if you assume they don't exist, then the way to do it is to send an email saying, I'm sure I'm wrong, but it sounds like this is what we're going after.
Sure.
Sounds like we're going after selling 20% more NFTs to brand new users within the next 6 months. Right?
Yeah.
versus, and it sounds like slightly less important than that, is increasing the number of NFTs sold by advanced users or whatever.
Mm.
And so I'm sure I've heard it wrong. I haven't been in the important meetings. You just blow smoke up their asses.
Yeah.
I haven't been in the important meetings. I'm sure that you guys have a much clearer perspective on this.
Mm.
If you could guide me in the right direction and help
Yep.
me understand this, I will help everybody else on design understand this so we can make your vision come true. It's all such horseshit, but it also works, right? We
It
can make
does.
your vision come true. And that should force conversations. And then what happens is, if they are the ones who have said, yes, we need to increase the number of NFTs sold to brand new users by 20% within the next 6 months, you can always come back to that and say, I know you just asked for a cool feature that bins and actually makes like frothy stuff come out of the CD drive on the computer. But can you explain to me, how does that get us to 20% more NFTs being purchased by brand new users,
That's
or
right.
better yet, by Serena in the next 6 months? Then they can come back, and it's not about who's smarter. It's that they're the ones who said, sell 20% more NFTs to Serena within the next 6 months. And you can come back and say, just explain. Yes, I can do it. I'll do a fewer things for Serena, or you can help me understand how this is great for Serena. And then the exec can come back and say, no, you're right. We'll stick with Serena because they're just sticking with themselves. Or no, we are switching. And then you'll say, good to know. Can we revisit it? So have all the goals switched? Happy to do it.
Oh, that would have been my next question, was how do you deal with when the goalposts change? So that's a really good way to approach that.
The only way to listen, the only worse than that goalpost switching is not knowing that they've switched.
Yeah.
And so I would also recommend designers always start their presentations, every single Figma file has one page on it that reiterates the measurable goals.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I do measurable goals in this Mad Libs format every single time: increase or decrease some important metric by some actual amount with a number in it within some time boxed period. Every single time. And there's lots and lots of great websites out there with basic metrics like time on site or conversion from, new visitor to user. All those things, most of them still apply to Web3.
Yeah.
No matter how much everybody poo-poos the old stuff.
Do you
Metrics are
think,
metrics.
do you think that, because those business goals, right, and those goals for attainable, measurable goals for user experience, I've found is different for new product ideas versus existing. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, great point.
so, hey, look, we are initiating this project. It's completely new. You're going to start with some desktop research. We need to understand the market. We think we know the market. We just want to build this thing, right?
Right.
And
yeah. I mean,
that,
then you still do, it's not an increase or decrease, but it's like achieve some amount of money sold in tokens, or achieve some number of users,
or understand if there's value in it at all,
and have a way to measure that. Like, are they coming back once a week?
Yeah.
There's always got to be a way. There's got to be
Yeah.
a way where
Totally.
you say after 6 months, we did good or we did bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the beginning of an early stage company, it's going to be about metrics, about traction, which is what matters to investors. So you have to define. What I like to do is create the deck that I need. So if I'm doing an investor, if we're trying to do a design because we need to raise more money in 6 months for a startup, then what numbers do I do a draft of that investor deck and say, look at this line. We made it move up and to the right. What's the label on that line? And how far up did it have to go? Okay, then we'll back out of that and we'll build our goals that way. Like, it's not all about users' needs. It's not all about business needs. It's not all about any of those things. It's about getting the company to the next step and knowing that, and speaking the language of your users, who are the founding team of this chaotic company that, by the way, just got given money, which makes them feel they're on the right track. They're not ready to hear data and change their minds about who their users are. They just want to see it the way they imagined it because they got money for it. No going to change their mind until they see it the way they think it's going to work.
Yeah.
Know this, Dave. I mean, this
Yeah,
happened
yeah.
to you a million times, right?
Yeah.
So,
No, indeed. Yeah.
so this whole thing about research, and that's another diatribe I could go off on, and data. Everybody thinks data is going to solve a problem, or that we should do research about users as a very first thing. You know, in my world, the truth is I don't do that. The truth is what I do first is nail down the hypotheses,
Mhm.
try to understand the way the decision makers are thinking. The
Yeah.
only assumptions that can ruin a product are the ones you don't know about. The most important assumptions in an organization are the key stakeholder and decision makers. Organizing those, data or no data, can only help the company.
Yeah.
Because then if you have them as a hypothesis, Serena Superfan is going to love our new Web3 thing.
Mm.
Then you can go out and now you can tell them whether or not Serena Superfan exists.
Mm-hmm.
But if you didn't nail her down in the first place and it was just new users,
Mhm.
never
Yeah.
gonna-
I like the way you're explaining how you're thinking about the stakeholders internal to the organization as users as well. And I think young designers definitely that's something they need to learn as they move through their career, that they're not just building that widget or that journey or that whatever it is for who they're being told is the user. I mean, those sorts of exercises in isolation, we got that term in Australia. It's like a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest, right?
Well, and young
And-
designers also, I had this big aha moment about 15 years ago where I was like realizing that I was grumbling around, running around thinking like, I wish they would just tell me what they want me to build. If
Yeah.
I just ask the right person at the right time, they'll tell me
Mm.
what they want me to design. And I
Yeah.
had this massive face slap moment of they don't know. So if they don't, just because they have a C in front of their title doesn't make them any smarter or less scared or
Mhm.
less risk averse than anyone else.
Yeah.
So either they don't know, or they're not sure they're aligned with everybody else, or they're
Yeah.
scared of being the one who's wrong. So no one's willing to say,
Mm.
this is our target. If that's the case and that's what you need, then your job, even as a junior designer, is help them give you the information that you need.
Yep.
What do they need to help them make the decision? Maybe it's 3 versions of the UI done in an hour
Yeah. Yeah.
that show the 3 different versions they're thinking about.
Yeah. And look, it's so tricky. It's also again back to what is the stage of development that the company is in, the product is in, who the new people are on the tech. There's just so many factors at play. And it's, look, here's a hack for me that I've found really useful in the past in those scenarios where it feels like there's an absence of a North Star in terms of frameworks of thinking about design, right? It's like at least trying to get from important people within the organization to agree on a company that is doing it well in their eyes.
Oh, that's interesting.
Who's doing it well in your eyes? Is it, just to pull an example off the top of my head. Okay. You're using Atlassian products. Have you seen the Atlassian playbook? Is that something you're aware of? Yeah, actually, shit. Great. You're reminding me of that. It's like, well, look, here's this team alignment exercise where we can actually try and figure out roles and responsibilities. And hey, it's not just about roles and responsibilities once up front on your position description. It's roles and responsibilities on every project you're on regularly. You know what I mean? So do you always know who's responsible for making decisions? Who's responsible for delivering? Who is responsible for documentation and research? And what do other people think other people's responsibility is, right? And so that's just one example. And, because it's quite often you come in and you just notice everyone's trying different things to solve the same problem of like, well, designers think that, look, I'm just working on what I've been told to work on. It doesn't feel right.
The only problem with that is Jeff Bezos and fucking Steve Jobs. So what you're saying is, hey, team, look around and see what software you're using that you really like or companies doing it well. And then you're saying,
Yeah.
look at how they do it. It takes a while.
Yeah.
which I think is absolutely genius. The
Mm.
only issue is that everybody likes to think of themselves as Bezos or Jobs, right?
Oh, I would definitely warn them away from that. I come across that all the time, and I'm
I
like,
would too, but they're the ones
yeah,
who think that they're the unique case where
uh,
their vision is so strong that they
uh,
can bypass this heavy duty process,
mhm.
right? But I think you're really smart to do that because it's them proving to themselves that slowing down to speed up would really work. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah,
we forget. I use this example all the time too. Like, imagine yourself
yeah.
considering well, in the United States, this is relevant probably for you, it isn't, but having to change insurance providers. Maybe you're
Mm,
having a kid, maybe you're getting married, maybe you're getting divorced, maybe you're changing states, changing jobs, right? So if you're looking at the insurance providers' websites, there's some pretty specific questions that everybody's going to have.
yeah.
Now picture being part of the insurance company's website development team and being in the meeting about the homepage.
Jeez.
Like we forget when we're in that fucking horrible homepage meeting, what people are actually really looking for some basic stuff.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Really basic. They don't care about super insure 2026 Delta Alpha released this week. Read the
Yeah, yeah.
press release. Like none of that stuff.
No.
So we forget when we're in the role of building stuff, what it's like to be a user of stuff,
Yeah.
right?
And that's interesting because I think people, when I was listening to your 20-minute masterclass, which I really loved in Web3, and before the Web3 crowd, this 20-minute masterclass on YouTube, which I'll put in the show notes for people. I found myself thinking again that people know this stuff by default, right? Like they really do, but they forget about it.
Yep. Yep.
Yes.
Yep. Yep.
And it's like, because it's not rocket science, right? But it is, people need a reminder, like, and they need a champion. And I suppose that comes down to how I explain my role as a designer to people. Fundamentally, like I like to say, look, everybody is a designer. I really, truly believe that we are, and you don't really need to overthink that one to see that it's true, right? We're all designing things all the time. So then if that's the case, what is a designer? Well, a designer is the champion of design process, the person who is thinking about how to rally people behind the design cause and get people involved. We're the facilitators of collaborative design, not superhero design, but collaborative design, right?
I know. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that it is a matter of just reminding people and being that, having those frameworks of reminding them that, look, and in simple ways, quite often, you know,
Yeah. So
look,
two interesting thoughts here. Jared Spool,
mm,
there's this few biggies like Jacob Nielsen and Jared Spool. Well, there's two of them. There's many
mm,
more than that. Jared Spool does some interesting talks on how to encourage members of the extended team to do design-esque activities
mm,
rather than saying we are the designer. Right. And it's not just design thinking stuff. It's also like, how can they think in terms of usability testing and stuff like that? So
yeah,
he's got some interesting content on that. And I revisited, you saw this in the 20-minute masterclass. I presented the 1994 heuristics that Jacob Nielsen
yeah,
had to this Web3 class, which I was
uh,
quite amused with myself. And when I was rereading them, there's something called Jacob's Law, which is that people spend much more time in other people's applications than in yours, which
that's
I'm
such a good
just
point.
in love with at the moment. And it
You
reminds
you
me
had
of,
yeah, like I gotta say, in that you had some really, really, really great moments in that 20. Great job on that. It was super cool.
thank
So
you. I was super nervous about creating that talk because listen, here's a great example. We're
yeah,
talking about people request, like you were applying for a job as it's described. Here's what was described to me. You have, Tamara, 20 minutes.
yeah,
And here's what we want. We want examples of good Web3 UX, examples of bad Web3 UX. We want Web3 design primitives. We want best practices,
hmm,
right? We want it in 20 minutes. So I've been doing this for 25 years. I immediately was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. How am I going to do this? Design primitives. I don't even know what design primitives are. And I was like, out. And then I was like, wait a second.
They
wait a
love,
second.
they love those words in Web3, don't they?
I know. And then I was
Means
like,
we don't know what we're doing.
I'm
Yeah.
like, so part of that presentation is I start with like, I know what you want. And I list all those things. And then I say, no, okay, now I'll give you a couple examples. Fine. But the second half of the presentation is here's what you need. And it's none of that shit. Because first of all, I
Yeah.
don't know what a design primitive is. Second of all, there are no best practices in Web3. There's just a bunch of people copying each other.
Mhm.
Right. And also none of the examples matter unless you have exactly the same user group and are solving exactly the same problem.
So did
As
you nervously feel like you may have been poking the bear or the tiger in the cage with that one? Because it was.
I nervously felt like I was never going to get another speaking gig. I mean, I've had
That's right.
in
Yeah.
Web3 for the literally, I got dragged into it in 2017, and like I'm a very confident person in my
Mm,
career. It really almost killed me. I went
yeah.
into this death spiral of confidence.
Mm,
These people did not want to hear anything from me. They were telling me I was slowing them down. They were telling me I
Wow.
didn't
Yeah.
understand the technology. They were
Oh,
implying that I'm old, which suddenly I'm not the youngest person in the room anymore. They were telling me stuff like,
sound familiar, Dad?
oh my God.
and they
This
were
is
No?
telling me stuff
great.
like,
Yeah.
we're just going to copy the UI of Google Drive. And my thought process was, that is so dumb that I don't even know how to tell you how dumb it is because I haven't had to say words like this in 25 years. And so I felt like I was failing because I was not making myself usable to them. They were
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you're frustrating us. You don't understand the technology.
It's
You're
interesting psychology, that, isn't it? That you can still, you can be, you can fall back into imposter syndrome after this amount of time in an industry where you know, like we're veterans. We've been doing this for a long time, but then all of a sudden you have a new group of kids on the block saying,
you're
no,
old.
we don't do things like that. That doesn't work anymore. And you're like, what? Really?
Right. And then my
Oh,
friend Milo was like, okay, so why don't you use the same arguments you used 20 years ago? And I was like, because I'm too fucking old. I don't want to like have arguments about, and by the way, speaking of Google Drive, Jared Spool has a great joke, which is that Google makes it easy to find anything unless it's stored in Google Drive. Just had to share.
yeah.
But I just felt pummeled and I felt like I was never going to work again because the main person who word of mouth got me work was 100% now he's a VC in blockchain. And I hadn't been traveling, so I hadn't been giving presentations. So I look up and look around and suddenly nobody knows who I am in the UX community or tech community really that much anymore because I had gotten all my work from one person.
Mm.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm sharing this is because if it can happen to me, it can
Mhm.
happen to anybody. And I literally, it was bad. I was making almost no money. Here
Yeah.
I am, this person who's written books and no, great speaker and worked at Amazon and everything. And I'm like, oh, fuck. Like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
this is true. I don't
Mm.
understand the technology. And then I forgot about things like none of us have to understand packets to redesign email.
I think that's when you and I reconnected
Yeah.
after the helpful engineering days. It was when I saw a post of yours in the Web3 space. I think you maybe just were posting about the project you were on at the time. And so I reached out because I was starting to dip my toes in the water. Dave invited me into that space, which, yeah, it was
Well, yeah, we had
baptism by fire on
Yeah,
my
no
account
doubt
as well.
because like, Web3 is primarily
Yeah.
about, preserving privacy and, like not conforming to, the huge Googles and Facebooks that are tracking and revealing, manipulating your data. So when I entered into a project that we needed to try and make the design decisions and, not being a designer myself, but being from the lens of marketing and looking at, user data, which wasn't being tracked because we don't use Google Analytics, was really difficult to say, what do we change and how do we actually, what are the users doing? So this was all done manually, literally manually, like with sticky notes and bits of string to map the journey of what our users may have been doing based off some open source software. So yeah, inviting you and Jackson into the team and saying, we have some real big front end issues to try to fix in 2 weeks before a project launch.
It was it.
How do we?
We did achieve some amazing stuff in a very short period of time there. No, there was, I think it was after the launch of the amazing stuff we delivered that things started to scale and get really, really, really complicated.
I had a question about that, Tamara, about Web3 user experience. Let's just say it's a broad topic, but I always felt that with Web3, users are incentivized to use the product. So it's kind of, does it skew like the information you're getting because you're going to naturally, when something is launched, let's say X project is launched, people want to jump onto it, connect the wallet, do things purely just to get that stamp, purely just to get that entry on chain. So, and probably there's no stickiness there. They probably will never come back to it.
To that product or Web3?
That's so different to like, Web2 or a SaaS product where people might actually want to use the product because it actually helps them do something like this. I guess that's the jobs to be done type of thing, right? But like in Web3, a lot of like, they're all cool. They're all cool contraptions. They're mouse traps. You use it and go, wow, I didn't know that was capable. That was a possibility. You don't ever use it again. You kind of just say, yeah, that was cool. That's great. That's the future.
Well, there's a lot in what you just said. I mean, the ironies in Web3 are amazing. Like if anybody ever gets really intimidated by Web3 and their snottiness and their technical elitism, remember that the way that they're telling people to be safe is to write 12-word passphrases on 2 notebooks and store them in 2 different places where they're unlikely to catch fire. That is literally the way that you are supposed to keep your passphrases safe. Write them on paper or scratch them on a piece of metal and put them somewhere where they don't catch fire. And I'm like, you dickheads are telling me that this is the most secure thing in the fucking world. And you're telling me to store a passphrase where it won't catch on fire? It's crazy, right? And it's also not solving problems that people actually have. So and Scott Galloway talks about this. He just talked about it on Pivot. Another presenter, like a big VC in the Web3 space, said this at the Build ETH conference that I was at. We have to start solving real problems for real people, not crypto problems for crypto people. Right.
Well, that is if the goal is to onboard the world to Web3, right? Which, I suppose eventually would be, but what I found, I was bumping my head into in the Web3 space was that elitism was almost an attractor for the people that were actually spending money.
100%.
So it was like, so they didn't want to make it. Once you got to the point of trying to make it more usable, they're like, hold on, we don't want to make it too usable. Otherwise it's not going to look like that, like the Pirate Bay, pixelated, 16-bit art and, white text on black backgrounds, like you said, we want it to look like it's piratey, so we're going to attract the degens that are actually spending money. Versus,
and there's a lot of pride around that. And there's a lot of,
it is a club.
It's such a club. And now they're starting to realize, because the market is cooled, because of the crypto winter, because people aren't throwing money at your face just for saying the word Web3 or blockchain, which they were. Since the beginning of 2023, it started to change. Like I've been fighting this battle since 2017 and almost just gave up. But since January, people are starting to like invite me to speak at things and, call me to help them. And it was not happening before. And that's because they're starting to realize that community, that is over. And the same thing happened with the beginning of the internet. The same thing happened with the beginning of Web 2 and e-commerce and all of those things. People get really proud of being an insider of technical stuff. There's even the study like that people are, will report that things that are hard to use are easy to use because they're proud of themselves for mastering it. Anyway, I don't know. I got to look that up.
Is it like called the Dunbar curve, or
is it?
If I got that right,
you might, and they might have saved me a lot of research.
You learn something, and like you think you've mastered something, but when you get to that point, you realize actually very little. And so this is, the entry into Web3, and then you load very little, you go back down the bottom of the curve, and then it's a slow, steep climb, a shallow climb to master actually the knowledge required to, operate within that technology industry or whatever it might be.
And I think user
I'll have to look that
experience
up.
is about changing that so that you don't have to become as technically masterful to get the benefits out of something, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I think what comes to mind for me is the Gartner Hype Cycle is brought up. So I'll read them out. So you've got the first stage of the 5 stages, the innovation trigger. Then you got peak of inflated expectations. Then you got the trough of disillusionment, which is where we are now.
yes.
With Web3. The next on the cycle is the slope of enlightenment.
I think this is what I'm
Yeah.
talking about.
And then the final one is a plateau of productivity, right?
This
And
is
so
so Dungeons and Dragons. It's awesome.
yeah, so the slope of enlightenment, I'll read that one because I think that is the one. So yes, the Gartner Hype Cycle. So the slope of enlightenment is more instances of how the technology can benefit the enterprise start to crystallize and become more widely understood. 2nd and 3rd generation products appear from technology providers. More enterprises fund pilots. Conservative companies remain cautious. So I don't know if that really actually,
well, that's
because
the
it's very,
enterprise.
very conservative market, right? Like Web3 I don't even know if I think we're in the trough of disillusionment, really.
I think
We
there's
haven't
another
even gotten
element.
to that.
There's something
Yeah.
else buried in there, which is
Yeah.
that right now, Web3 is posturing sort of that it's for everybody and it's going to infiltrate all parts of individual life.
Mhm.
I think the truth is more like it's going to be like rewiring my house,
Yeah.
right? Light switches are still going to work in the same way. Banks are still going to be available to me. They're still going to
Yeah.
provide support. They're going to provide credit cards. The wiring behind it is going to change. So maybe it'll be cheaper or faster or whatever, or safer
Yeah.
or whatever, and require maybe a few more things from me. But
Yeah.
85% of blockchain technology is going to be like that. Shit that you never see is going to
Yeah.
be revamped and improved. The 15% is going to be for regular humans is going to be
Mm.
wacky as hell, though, because suddenly your bank account is going to look a lot more like an investment account, and it's
Mm.
going to make your
Yeah.
brain warp.
Yeah. Well, it'll become the norm, right? And that's here on this hype cycle. That's that plateau of productivity.
When
Mainstream adoption.
community features started coming up, this was way
Mm.
before like Facebook and all that stuff. Community was the big thing, right? And so
Yeah.
everybody wanted to add community to their site. And I was working with a bank at the time, and I'm like, who the fuck wants to hang out at a bank and have a community of friends? It's like, I don't want to go have coffee at a bank, right? But they're like, we have to have. I'm like, this is like saying we need
Yeah.
more concrete in our building, right?
Yeah.
It's just concrete.
But it works for Web3.
Web3 or
Yeah.
Web3,
Yeah.
right?
Because that's what I mean with everyone's incentivized to at least touch the product once, because they know that they are kind of contributing to the ecosystem. So, it doesn't matter if they have a problem. They've actually got the problem that the product's trying to solve. They're just wanting to contribute, and they connect or do something. So it's really hard to then say, oh, like we're onboarding. Yes, okay, for numbers' sake, they've got a large amount of users, but have they acquired those users because the product is actually good,
Yeah.
or because they just want to connect their wallet?
Hmm.
Right. And are they going to keep them? So one of the things that I did this deep dive on wallets, not that, a couple of years ago now. And imagine that every account that you ever created on the internet had maybe $1.50 in it. Can you even begin to imagine how you would go back and get that $1.50 out of every account? I'm not talking about bank accounts. I'm
Hmm.
talking about you
Yep.
made an account at like PetSuppliesForLosers.com back in, 2003, and it's got $1.50 in it.
Mm.
That's what's going to happen, is that
Mm.
there's going to be all of this space junk that is going to have
Yeah.
tiny bits of value in it, so that our relationships to our accounts, it's going to break our brains. People are going to have hundreds, thousands of wallets that have some kind of value in them, that don't talk to each other, that are completely confusing, right? That are on different blockchains. Like if you can't understand blockchain, try for blockchains and layer 1 and layer 2 and blah, 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 blah. It's going to cause user chaos, because when you and I have this little phrase I use, I'm not even sure it makes sense, but when you decentralize around institutions, you centralize around the user, which means that every single bit of detail that institution was handling for me as a user, I now have to handle.
Yep.
Which
Yep.
means,
Makes sense. Makes perfect sense, actually. That's really, really good.
which means, can you even, I mean, we still have trouble as designers developing good permission nesting systems, meaning if this person has permission and this person reports to that person, this person also has permission. Like, that's a hard thing to do. That's really basic, but a hard thing to do. Imagine for Web3, vaults, wallets that belong to your employer, sub-wallets that you get only through your employer, but then you have your own wallet that is on a different chain and doesn't accept this transaction fee. It's coming, which is why all of us need to get more interested in it, because they need us.
Yeah. And look, I think that's what's really interesting, right? Like, rock bottom in the hype cycle, and now you have, Web3 founders calling you up saying, "Hey, look, sorry about what we said about, UX heuristics and not."
They're not saying
no,
sorry.
yeah, I know. You know what I'm saying, though. They're calling up. They go, "Hey, look, would you mind just bring some of that UX magic that you were talking about over?" It's like, so it's happening, right? It's like, shit, we need to onboard more users. We need to fix the narrative after this FTX stuff has happened. Like we still believe in this technology. We need to move forward.
This is another thing I think that we need to get over as designers too. You're just bringing this thought, which is, we always want to do it the right way. We always want to put in process. We want to slow down a lot to speed up. And I've had to get over myself a little bit, because now, so what I've started doing, because I have experimented with all these different ways to sell my services in the early stage startup world, what I do now is I offer what I call a quick hit. And I'm not saying this to sell to anybody on this podcast. I'm telling you, you'll see in a minute. Instead of, now I say every new client, we do a quick hit. It's probably around 4 weeks. We have a pretty scoped goal. And all I try to do for them is help a little. So I don't do it the right way. Instead,
quantifiable.
I
You
put
go
lipstick
measurable.
on pigs. I put lipstick on pigs as profession, right? I know it's the wrong.
Yeah. You have to do it, right? It's like, it's, I think, have you ever read the book? I think it's called First 3 Months or something. It's
No.
I'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes, but it really, about your first 3 months in a role with a company in the senior
Well,
position.
that's totally different, because that.
But it's similar. They talk about a similar thing, right? It's like, you need to figure out exactly, and like, it's a long time since I read this, but it's something to the effect of, you need to understand the hierarchy of alignments that you have within the organization. It's not always obvious who you need to impress. It's not always obvious, right? But you also need to try and get some runs on the board with those people. You don't know what those runs look like. Those runs could be just conversations. They could be artifacts. They could be some sort of output, documents, whatever, but you need to figure out who those people are, and you need to figure out how to impress them, essentially, right? Show them that you're worth your weight.
Yeah, and it would work. I mean, as a consultant, the interesting thing is it works for me too, because if I do my job, if I'm on fuego, if I'm on fire, it's because we're having this great back and forth, and we're in Figma, and the guy, whoever it is, isn't totally upset that I'm moving things around and turning them orange, which is absolutely the wrong way to fix anything, right? Is move it around and turn it orange. But if that is going really well, then there is this burgeoning, this ember that is starting to catch fire between both the designer and the founder, that, there's a different way to be thinking about this. And then if we do start to get to this clarity, if I do answer Tamara's question about, is it Serena Superfan or is it Donnie Degen? Then things will start to move better. If it doesn't start to catch fire, I'm out of there after 4 weeks anyway. And see ya, wouldn't want to be ya, because you're not ready for me.
And look, I think it's actually gotten, it's become easier to execute on some of those deliverables short term. I think in the old days when we were using Xure and Photoshop, yeah, I think as a UX designer who's being asked to deliver some sort of pixel based stuff that people can understand, which is in a lot of cases what they're after, right? Like you mentioned Figma, it's like somebody has been behind writing the check to get you into the building as a consultant or a hire, right? What their perception of user experience design is often you're a graphic designer, right?
Right.
Right. You know, and so, I call it running parallel strategies, right? Like I'm, repeat myself over and over again, but it's like, look, I'm going to come in, I am going to run this parallel strategy. I'm going to work with you to deliver some of these short-term results that you are asking me to do. But really in parallel, you need to understand that I need to know these things. This is not my job, right? This is not what you want to be paying me a lot of money to do, right? I'm the expensive one here. Don't pay me to push things around in Figma, right? It's not the right spot for me, So look, I will push some things around in Figma for you short term, but in parallel, we've got to work on this strategy for the long-term goals what are your business objectives?
Right.
Where do we need to
And
get
by
to?
the way,
How are
when
we
I
going
put together
to
the business objectives, I've now changed to calling them user experience metrics.
user
It's the same
experience?
exact thing,
Yeah.
but it's less intolerable to the business team. Like,
Mm.
what do we need users to do for this thing
That's
to be successful, and how many times do we need
yeah,
to,
that's really good.
Yeah.
right?
That's a really good approach.
Same
Yeah.
exact thing. Like, what do we need?
Yeah.
What numbers do we need to change? What do users need to do for us to feel like this is a successful thing? But Jackson, you're also getting at this really interesting balance of how you use your power when you first arrive somewhere.
Mm.
I think one of the glorious things about Never Search Alone is also that it's about developing your power before you join. And he starts with this philosophy that all of us are feeling imposter syndrome when we are looking for a job, no matter how senior we are.
Mm.
And that going through a process of understanding what you love and hate and talking to people you've worked with before, and then creating, this is the genius idea, candidate market fit. We all think about
Mm.
product market fit, but if we're looking
Yeah.
for a job, we're the product.
Mm.
Can we create a concise candidate market fit statement? And then
Mm.
during the interview process, we create the OKRs, which flips the power structure, flips our brains back into an active mode, and also helps us hit the ground running once we get there, because we know that there's some agreements on the OKRs we're going after and the success metrics for you as an employee, as a professional, right?
Yeah.
So that gives you the freedom. The scary thing about quick wins is that it can set up the expectation in the organization that you're just going to keep doing that.
That's the challenge, right?
Totally.
That's it. And that's why, I bore myself repeating it, right? It's like, look, hey, we're doing this. Yes, Figma, I can do that. And I can do it. I love doing it. This is like, I really enjoy it. If you can clear some space for me and I get to push some pixels around, I love it. I really, really enjoy this. However, I'm very expensive and I can probably multiply myself 5 times if you give me a team of designers to do this stuff. Right. And I help to, to realize your vision
So
by helping to manage them.
here's the way I would do that, though. Coming to, like, once they've decided to spend on you, they've decided to spend on you. So if you have
Yeah.
a proposal for something else, I would actually create it as a proposal with a new org structure and prices.
Mhm.
And I would actually give them side by side. Here's the price for me and the number of hours you're utilizing me to. So coming with the complete solution where they just say, check,
Yeah.
because no one has time to do the
Yeah.
right thing in
Mm.
business. I should
Yeah.
patent, or that should be the name of my book. No one has time to do the right thing.
Yeah,
in
that-
business. So the
Right.
more you can come with solutions,
Yep.
right? So when I have this article on what you should expect when you bring your UX talent to a startup, and by the way, all these things are on my site. You'll put a link to
Mm.
it. But one of the things you should do is ask them for the org structure today, and ask them for what the org structure will look like in a year, and redraw the org structure in a year for what it needs to be if you're going to be successful.
Yeah.
They
I
have
completely agree. Yeah.
they
And that's, I
haven't
think, in my consultancy, that those were product-based packages, right?
Right.
It's like, look, if I'm not bringing the team that does the UI and the prototyping and all of that, they should have that internally, and I'm just coming to do the training package, right? I'm helping you to actually teach your team to do this work, because me coming in to execute on something over a month that has considerable value and can track against those OKRs is, well, it's impossible as a one-man band, right? It's either you've got the team or I bring the team, and it's easier when you actually bring it as a package like that, because you're not having to influence the org structure until after you've delivered on that first objective, right? Like you get through that month, you deliver on solving that initial problem, reaching that initial objective. Through that experience, you might then find space for more conversations about how they're going to grow their team. How are you going to execute on this? Now that we've gotten to this space, how are you going to execute? You only have these resources, X, Y, and Z. You realistically need a few more, right? So yeah, I totally agree. I think, back to the experience of my recent experience of taking a full-time role as opposed to, being a consultant with these consultancy packages, is just that. It's like, how then do you take those, if the company's unwilling for you to bring those insights back up the chain, if they can't hear it, if they can't understand it, then yeah, I think what I did was exit. It was the right thing to do, because, you need to be able to inform that structure. You need to be able to collaborate on a roadmap of achievable goals, including getting the right people on the team at the right time.
Absolutely.
But look, hey, I think because we are 10 minutes away from an hour and a half, I've got all day. I don't know how long you guys have got. And I wanted to do a little segue, because there's another article that I'm going to put in the show notes, which was your article, Why Blockchain and Web3 User Interfaces Will Suck for a While. Tamra, that was from April 2022. That still applies. I just reread it before the call. Really great stuff. And I think in terms of this, it's a good segue into, so we talked about this hype cycle, right? The Gartner Hype Cycle and those stages of hype. And we're seeing another hyped technology hit the scene at the moment, AI, right? That's where we're at. It's everywhere, just like Web3 was everywhere, just like communities and chatbots were everywhere before that. But it's like, we're here. It's AI. Be cool to understand what you think about this. Is it another hype cycle to you? What are your concerns? Do you have any concerns as a UX designer when it comes to
I
AI?
have concerns as a human. In
Mm-hmm.
terms of professionally, I just have to quote Scott Galloway again. And he said, AI isn't going to take your job. People who know how to use AI are going to take your job. I think that's really smart. Like, I think that people who get in there and really start to understand how to create queries and how to do magic with that kind of stuff are going to be able to do multiple different kinds of jobs in really interesting and amazing ways. In personally, well, doom scrolling is terrible. Somehow I look at my phone first thing in the morning, which is just a bad idea, and I never don't do it, which is sad.
I think there's three of us on this call that probably do it. Yeah, that's it.
In the United States, I feel like the world is crumbling around us and coming back to we are the frog in the cold water pot of pre-Nazi frickin' Germany. That's what I feel. And things are starting to collapse. And the AI element of this is that it wouldn't worry me, except that there is a population that is so excited to get bad information.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If there wasn't
addicted to it, right? Like addicted to that way of thinking, that way of existing. Yeah.
It doesn't matter that Trump is corrupt. Trump is stupid. Neither of those things matter. We all thought those of us on, on a more slightly more liberal, even slightly more liberal side, we're like, this is never going to happen because people are going to realize how dumb this is and how how much this is like about 50s values of white supremacy and
Yeah.
all of this other stuff that's like, of course everybody's going to wake up and see this, right?
Mm.
No, they woke up, saw it, and loved it. That's the problem, right? And so if there's people out there who are loving this different view on the world that may have
Mm.
nothing to do with the reality, the disconnect from reality doesn't matter. That's the thing that scares me. If there weren't if everybody out there was demanding good information,
Mm.
then there's nothing but excitement about AI. If the
Yeah.
demand was for good info. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, in the country I live in, there's a huge demand for bad info, and AI is going to make it much easier to deliver that in a
Yeah.
very professional looking manner. So that's my
It's
personal feelings about it.
Yeah, so I think that you express two sets of views there, right? There was personal and professional, and I think the professional one is definitely on both sides, right? You can only see a certain distance in the future. It's just like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
we can't see too far in the future, right? But AI won't take your job, but the person using AI will.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like to me, I felt like I'm starting to make peace with, how much I think it's been actually great to go through this process of assessing how much meaning you derive from your job. Like, and I think everyone's like, a lot of people have been going through that, it's like, oh shit, AI is going to take my job. Oh crap. It's like, and it's a really imposing idea that as a knowledge worker, when you spend this amount of hours in front of, you know, learning and perfecting your craft, that the prospect of a machine coming and taking it is disastrous when you first start thinking about it. Like, holy shit. And after a while, it's like, well, how much do I, how much do I actually like working? You know?
There's another way
Yeah, it's like,
that you just made me think of that, like, we should, if you are worried about AI, then flip your
uh,
thinking from how can AI help
I
me in
think that's
my
the other side of what I was saying is I'm not even worried about that. I went through the stage of acceptance, like, wow, where do I get my meaning from? Is it my work? Work's been lots of fun, but I think that's been a really nice moment to accept that. But then I've gone to the point where, hold on, I feel like this technology isn't as fantastic as I initially thought. And what it's being sold as, the more time I spend with it, the more questions it leaves me with. Um, the more holes I see in the quality of its output. And in a lot of cases, I have to
Well,
force myself to jump back into it to retry it, to see if it's actually gotten better.
and
Because,
that's the right approach, right?
yeah,
Because
yeah.
like if you take a lesson from Web3,
Mm,
the people that like touched the technology right in the
mm,
beginning when it wasn't working and when things were, it was just all trial and error and experiments. Like that was like a really valuable learning curve to the point where it is now, which is still not, like flawless,
yeah.
but the approach that like we took in the beginning was like, okay, our jobs won't get replaced, but let's just play with it as much as we
Mm.
can because this it's useful
You've got to
somehow.
understand where it's at, right? But it's definitely not, based on my personal experience, concerned about it taking my job anytime soon.
Well, I
Um,
think it's very interesting to focus on things that AI is never gonna be able to do, right? So, let's take
mm,
personas.
It,
There are
yeah.
already people out there saying, "Here, AI will generate personas for you," right? And maybe they can out of
Did you
data.
did you watch our video on creating personas with that guy?
No, I didn't. Is it out there?
yeah, we did that. We did that.
Okay,
That
so
was
here's
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't know what
really
you
cool.
came up with, but what I'll say is those personas are gonna fail, and the reason they're gonna fail is because the problem isn't lack of data.
yeah.
The problem isn't the ability to create a persona out of data.
Mm,
In my opinion, after 25 years of focusing on this, what matters is alignment, and the alignment is created through the conversations to
com-
create. One way to do it is through conversations to create non-data driven personas that
yep.
bring your assumption, everybody's assumptions out into the light and organize them into people described in terms of statements that start with the words I want and I need. That is
Yeah.
never, ever going to be something AI can do, because it's about bringing people together in a room and navigating the politics and having those conversations. So
Yeah.
if people are going to be happy with those personas they create, more power to them. There's so many companies out there, whatever. But that's not where I'm interested. Where I'm
No.
interested in is, what is the actual problem that I solve? And
Mm.
bizarrely enough, it's the it's 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 the politics of
Yeah.
stakeholders.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that's where we actually got to in that video. Have a look at it when you get a chance.
I will.
But it was more of an exploration rather than a promotion. It was like, hey, what can we do with this thing? And it was really at the moment. What we did was we did a really, really top level, super rapid workshop on what a discovery session, a journey mapping session might look like for an onboarding process for a platform, right? So we did that the way we would, a version of how we would normally tackle that in a remote workshop setting. And then we're like, okay, well now let's try and do that in ChatGPT, try and get some of those same insights from ChatGPT, right? And the outcome was, look, and it's really neat to see this being repeated online everywhere now since we did it. But the realization was, great place to get your mind started. Like, say if everybody in that workshop had the same ability to generate some ideas and just get some things going, right? It's just inspiration. Like what could the jobs to be done be if you were this person, in this industry, on this platform, what could they be? Okay, cool. Wow. I'm thinking it's none of them, but hey, here's an idea I had while I was reading them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But the problem is though, and this is where another insight that we had from it was, it's bandwidth. Like then you're all of a sudden inundated with text and concepts from a machine that doesn't potentially have any context really to the goals, spitting a shitload of stuff out at you. And then you've got to read that and understand it to then generate better ideas. Right. And it's like,
Something introduced in our books, in our early book, 2005 book, that I still think is genius and actually applicable to what you're saying, which is before you start any persona effort, you should determine what problems you're trying to solve with the personas.
Yeah.
You say, here's what the problem is. Here's some, it's 4 columns of a spreadsheet. Here's what the problem is. Here's some evidence of it.
Yeah.
Here's what we want it to look like instead. Like everybody, there's 45 different words for users in our spec doc. Right?
Yeah.
How we want it to look is everybody using the same name. And the last column is, how will we know that it's changed for the better?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you start out before you use any tool by asking yourself to write down, what problem are we trying to solve with AI, with whatever? If we're trying to solve, hey, we need a lot more text that's written in kind of clunky way to read, AI will solve that. And if you're trying to create a persona out of massive data sets, and that's possible, we want to understand massive data sets by turning them into personas. Great. But those kinds of personas are never going to solve the actual problems that you probably have. And so just taking, and I think we've looped back around to the beginning of this conversation, which is what our key, our most powerful question is, what problem is this trying to solve? Is this team trying to solve with this job description? Am I trying to solve with my career? Is AI trying to solve? Do personas try to solve? Is Web3 solving? What's the actual problem? And new technologies almost never have a clear answer to that. But if we come back to the problems we actually have and try to think about, if I look at it through this lens, I'm very clear on the problem I have. Now show me.
It's like, and when you look at it, when you help us look through that lens, like in this moment, it's clear to me, if I to frame the problems that say something like ChatGPT, which everyone knows is helping to solve. Well, number one, it is raising more capital for the organization to get to artificial general intelligence, right? Like that's the race. So it's like, what can we release that really, really ropes people in, that gets them really fucking excited? And we've just designed a chatbot that can answer anything.
Well, and in your
Like anything, right? And it looks fantastic at face value. You go, holy shit, this is like gonna, if I can ask this thing anything and it's more than it's smarter than me or anyone I know, holy shit, this is like, what am I going to do? You know, I don't need to register at university or college anymore because it's like, and then there's the hype train right there, right? But then the other problem that it might solve, if I was to think of a second one, and this is the only one that I can see at this point in time with these tools, is a tool for initiating the thought process.
That's the problem that I wanted to come back to that. You did solve a problem. You wanted everybody to start talking from the same baseline of inspiration.
Yeah.
And if you did force everybody to ask the same question in their own language to ChatGPT at the beginning of the meeting, and you would have solved that problem, which is people aren't talking, or they're using totally different language, or they're feeling not heard.
Yeah.
Then that tool does solve that.
Yeah. And to a degree, right? Because then you've got if those are the only two problems that this tool solves, right? And the first problem isn't really solved because it's just making a whole bunch of shit up sometimes. And you can't necessarily trust it, you know, like then what's it doing? It's just raising a shitload of money for these guys over here, you know, which, you know, makes me sleep better at night. That's great.
Wow, can you tell me what you mean when you, sorry, Tamra?
That's fine.
It's challenging.
I think it's an Australian thing. That's it.
Yeah, it's the Australian
Tamara.
thing. Tamara. Yeah, I have a friend. So sorry, I lost my train of thought. I wanted to probe you on your comments around the definition of users and how it. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, so my jokey cute thing is user is a 4-letter word. So a lot of times, you know, people think if we just start talking about users, then we are going to become more user focused. But the problem is if I say, like, this is an old thing, like if I say the word cow, we're all thinking about a cow. Think about a cow under a tree. We're thinking about a cow under a tree. But you know, what color is your cow and what color is your cow? I mean, we're all on the same page, but we're not. How big is your cow? How old is your cow? What is the destiny of your cow? Like, we can con ourselves into thinking that we are all talking about the same thing. But words like user, and we use words like user to do that. But the word user can mean different things to every person in the room right at this minute. And if you ask those same people tomorrow, they can mean different things then, which is why you get execs coming back in a design room and design review and saying, well, what about the guy who has a parrot? Have we thought about him? And it's just as valid as any other thought. What about the person who doesn't have a printer? Right? Well, they're all users. They're all correct. But they're not helpful because they're distractions. But if we start creating Serena Superfan and Donald Degen and Egon Early Opportunity and all of them underneath that have statements of what those people want and need from your product, then suddenly you are sort of describing differences that make a difference. And it's much more likely that you'll be much closer to the same page when we all think about Egon Early Opportunity, right?
Yeah.
We're probably closer together in our picture of who Egon is, even just with that name, than we are with a cow, even.
Yeah. So you're talking about, so these are practices that you outline in more detail in your book, The Persona Life Cycle. And there's another.
I actually don't use that process really. I mean, I use that sort of framework, but I haven't created personas with data in 15 years. Because they don't solve the problem that I'm interested in, which is alignment. So if you're interested in the alignment persona process, which is a 5-step process, there's a video on my site about it. I'm trying to write a book or create a video series on how to do it. You know, I just need more inspiration to do that. But it's these 5 conversations that you have to create what I'm calling alignment personas, which are not that different from proto personas. I used to call them ad hoc personas. And it's what are the measurable goals? How are we talking about users today? What are their wants and needs? How would we group them under wants and needs? How would we, how would we create some personas out of those groupings? And how would we prioritize those quick personas we created based on our business goals?
Yep.
So that we can say, if we need to increase this by 20% within 6 months and we don't make Serena ridiculously happy, we failed. That's the entire process. Easier said than done, but that's where the magic is. And you can use those personas as a hypothesis for research. But what you're really doing is you're saying, okay, you guys in this senior team have been thinking about this problem for months and months and months. Let's at least put names on your assumptions so that you all are actually kind of talking about the same people, which you think you are, but you're not.
Would you say that when you mention wants and needs, are they the same as the jobs that they're trying to get done?
They
Or is that
sometimes are
different?
similar. It's funny because jobs to be done, like I went back and looked at jobs to be done, and jobs to be done is actually a very deep research method, right? I think people concatenate it with like, what are they trying to do on our website? But it's actually, so sometimes the tasks they are trying to achieve, the goals that they have are very much related to what you would call a job to be done. But sometimes they're not. Like sometimes they're like, oh, I'm coming to this website because I want and need to understand how you're different from your competitors.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a task, but if you don't get them through that, they're not going to get to the onboarding.
Yeah, I think you're right. So yeah, if I was to think of jobs to be done in terms of, because there's this, in my view, there's two, or my experience, there's two different types. There's jobs to be done that developers speak about. There's jobs to be done as the research method, JTBD, which is, if this user is already getting this job done elsewhere, we need them to switch from that to this, right? And so you're talking about wants and needs in terms of what are they looking for at a granular level once they're viewing once they're experiencing this product or journey. Yeah. Or are they emotional wants and needs?
They're much more likely to be related to what they're trying to do with your product.
Okay. Gotcha.
But if you state things in terms of words, I want and I need, you're starting to think like users instead of about users, right? Because
Sure.
you're forcing yourself to state it in a way that would come out of their mouths.
Mm.
Like, for example, I need to figure out which insurance company is going to cover my baby without costing me a lot of extra money. Right. And then that would remind you, then you look at your insurance website, and you're like, we've made it nearly impossible for that person to get that done. Right.
Right.
It just reminds you to look at it through the perspective of somebody coming in and wanting to do something. And I used to joke about this all the time, like all these e-commerce websites, all of them would you'd come in saying, I need a pair of socks. And they go, look, the hippopotamus, we have umbrellas. Right? Try to yell you out of whatever reason you came there in the first place. You can't yell people out of what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
Distracting them doesn't work. You have to say, I see that you're looking for socks. Here are all the socks. Oh, by the way, when you're done with the socks, is it because they're getting wet? Maybe you'd like an umbrella.
Mm.
And this is what Amazon's good at, right? So yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
It's working in the back end.
Yeah, although Amazon is interesting because
Creating the
those are
experience.
we think of them as features, but they're really ads.
Yeah.
But that's true.
right.
I mean, it's still
Yeah.
good. But
What about the anti? Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead. I'm sorry.
What about the anti-persona? I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about that. It's a concept that I only just learned of, and I wondered if it's useful.
Anything that can get your senior level team super clear about what they're asking the rest of the organization to do and why is good. So there was an example of anti-personas like with Microsoft Vista, which is 1 million years ago. Then we put this in the book, which was that there were a series of people coming in that were creating small business accounts for whatever, and they were actually there for nefarious purposes. So they created this description of this person or these people that would help designers identify whether they were making it too easy for those people to do nefarious things. So again, it's what problem are you trying to solve? Are you trying it just comes back to that. If you're trying to solve the problem that your team is thinking about the wrong person, then a negative persona may or may not be the right way to do that. You just have to figure out what the right tool is for the job. But having a negative persona like in that Vista case where it's like, okay, now let's look at this experience through Arnold Asshole, right? And step
Mm.
through it as if
Mhm.
we're him, then it can be really useful.
Makes
So
sense.
you sent this article last night, Dave. I just opened it up. And so I think for anyone listening or watching, the anti-persona, an exercise and identify the people that you specifically want to prevent or discourage from using your product, which is, a really interesting idea and
And
not
it's been
not
around
something I've ever thought about before.
it's been around
Yeah, I
forever.
think
Yeah.
it comes to me from the lens of like obviously what do they call in agile? Is it gold plating when you just putting lots of features like for the sake of building
Mm.
features? That's correct, right?
Maybe an agile.
So
I call it barnacle-based design, but that's just me.
yeah, something like this, and so it's like when to decide not to build this shiny new object because it actually doesn't serve personas.
Well, and let's talk about what's the real problem there. The real problem is that feature creep is decimating that organization's productivity because shiny new features are being introduced probably by someone powerful and there's no way to resist them. So the design and dev teams are being forced politically to create a bunch of bolt-on
Mm.
dumb things, maybe in response to a competitor adding a feature, often in response to a competitor adding a feature, but they're not
Yeah.
considered holistically. The real problem there is prioritization and goal definition.
Mm. That's right. So in terms of, I often speak to people about prioritization in terms of problems. So, problem prioritization at a more senior level. So, rather than looking at the backlog in terms of, hey, here's this roadmap and here's all the features that are prioritized based on that roadmap. And hey, it's already established and we're just going to keep on chugging along. It's like, well, hey, do we have a list of problems we're experiencing right now?
Right.
And which ones are the most important to solve
Well, and do we have
in which order?
metrics that we're going after that are more important than solving this problem? I mean,
Hmm.
if somebody launches a shiny feature that's for degens and we're going
Yeah.
after, Serena's super new super fan,
Mhm.
then I should, from the lowliest point in the organization, be able to say, aren't we going after Serena's super fan? And I don't understand how this feature is going to help her. Right. And then we've looped back to that again.
Yeah.
So that you're not challenging the smartness or innovativeness or coolness of the person introducing the feature. You're just coming back to something that they approved earlier.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Look, and this, I think this is a brilliant conversation. I don't want to interrupt anybody on this. I think we're coming up to 2 hours on this. And so I think probably there's a few more questions, just a couple of things that
Okay.
I'd probably ask just to wrap up. But amazing to have you on, Tamra. And
Yeah,
hopefully we
certainly.
can,
I
another
understand if
reason
you
for
want to cut my diatribe about Trump. That's fine. Whatever you want.
I think we'll do a separate podcast on that. So that's
Yeah.
good. No, I've really enjoyed this and we're definitely not running out of things to talk about. So I'm trying to choose the last few questions wisely.
Okay.
I think one thing that I'd find interesting for you, before I ask the final question on some advice for the AI world on how to design better products based on your experience with Web3. There's a question I got about. So I don't know if you're aware of, do you know 37 Signals, Jason Fried?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Really, like he wrote a great book called Shape Up, where he's sort of formalized an end-to-end process, which is not, I think it's almost anti-agile. It was a little while ago that I read it, right? So again, I'm trying to call back from memory. It's these 6-week cycles and, the form of rapid ideation and design is embedded in that process. Now, Jason talked a lot about not the fact that they don't do formal usability testing, that they just ship products, right? They just ship it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite interesting, I think, because he seems to it seems to promote it as like a one size fits all thing. It's almost like, it almost feels clickbaity, right? Like sort of, we don't do formal usability testing. We just ship product. And I think for him, for 37 Signals and his products, they have been established since, was it 2000 or 2001 or something, and just iteratively building and launching iterations where, I think their development team wrote Ruby on Rails. Like they've got this amazing in-house approach to product design that works for them. Right. But I feel like it's, what are your views on that whole promise of just shipping product without testing? And I don't think it's a one size fits all from my perspective. When he's promoting that, I don't think it's a one size fits all approach to just ship product. What are your thoughts?
So I think with a lot of startups, like there was this, when I worked at Amazon, there was this rule. If you were going into a Jeff Bezos meeting to show designs, you always show what they want first, what you wanted first, and then the better options if you thought there were better options. You never show the different options first. You always show them what he wanted, right? And so I think with a lot of early stage startups, they have a really strong picture in their head of a way that they're going to solve a particular set of problems for a particular set of people. And data is not going to change their minds until they try it. I think that's just a reality. So I think I probably don't disagree with their approach. If they're helping early stage startups launch these ideas, then, just getting them to a point where they feel comfortable launching is probably good. A second thing to say there is that you're not even going to, like, I worked with an early stage startup in RFID, and it's like, we went through so many rabbit holes down, and with all of the discussions about features and functionality, and we were wrong on 75% of them. And it's like, there's no way to know that until it got into the hands. I don't know that I would say ship it, but certainly pilot it. And doing user research wouldn't have identified those problems because we were inventing a new way of doing things. We were just inventing it in a kind of weird way. So I don't know that usability tests would have found that. However, the way I like to think about usability tests is they identify wrinkles in the carpet. If there is a wrinkle in the carpet and one person trips over it, other people are likely to trip over it. Doesn't matter whether it's a statistically significant portion of the carpet that's wrinkled. It's just if one person, and so if you do just even quick, what would you do first? What would you expect? What would you do second? Which doesn't take all that much time to do reasonably well. Or you can use usertesting.com or whatever. Doing a pass to find the wrinkles in the carpet before you launch is never a bad idea because you can fix them. And at least you can put a better foot forward, literally and figuratively.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting, right? Because it comes again down to so many different factors, right? Like where are you a one-man band who's got an idea, or a small group of people, are operating with limited funds early in the piece? Like, are you an established a startup with, a team of 5 to 6 developers, with good processes? Are you all of these different things lead to different methods of testing. So they're essentially testing because it's fast for them to ship it and get it in the hands of users. And they would have feedback loops boiled into the system where they can actually collect that back, right? Not everyone has that luxury. They don't have that maturity. They haven't, they're not at that point yet. And so warning people away from doing any formal testing up front before the build, I think is my alarm bells go off.
Yeah.
Because I've seen it, right? Like, I suppose one of the true tests is staying power, because some companies have seen when they've survived the 5 years it's taken them to get to market, because they pushed through and they've not had anything on production until 5 years later, when, hey, we could have prototyped a lot of that and actually had some really useful conversations early to figure out whether or not we're designing the right thing. But, a lot of people don't want to hear it. They just want to build product and want to build software. But yeah, look, I think it's really great to hear your feedback on that. The last thing I'm going to ask you before we tie things up, unless Dave's got any other questions, and unless you've got any questions for us, Tamra, which is always invited as well, based on your experience in the Web3 space and this whole hype cycle thing that we've been discussing, would you have any advice for the AI and large language model community of product developers?
Okay. Would I have any advice for the designers and developers of things like AI?
Yeah, things like PT4 and these diffusion models. Anywhere where they're building products or utilizing these new models and making them, you know, deploying them as products in the world today.
Well, this is, I don't know that this is, I don't even know if this is good advice. I just don't. But if it was me, because I'm so stymied by what this stuff is going to do and who it's going to do I would wait for a while. I would keep my eyes wide open and set aside
Yeah.
an hour a day to like, I would subscribe to Product Hunt. I would like subscribe to AI tools, newsletters. And what you're going to see is that there's 6 or 7 new AI products that are launched every single day. And each of
Mm,
them is essentially a package set of prompts for someone specific, like automate your marketing message with, keywords about cats or something.
yeah.
I would just really keep my eyes open and be collecting a bunch of screenshots and stuff because it's the same as Web3 right now. There are no correct design patterns. There are no conclusions. It's insanely early. And
Mm,
personally, I would like start blogging about what I'm seeing. Like, here's what I like about this or don't like about that or whatever, and start just noodling about it in public or little
Should we
videos.
start a podcast, Dave? What do you reckon?
Yeah. Like literally there was an old podcast with Phil and his old partner Mark where they were like, they had 2 animated frogs talking about people's UIs and critiquing them.
Yeah, yeah.
That's what I would start doing to build a career in this as a designer. I say, from my perspective,
Mm,
this is a little weird because blah.
yeah.
And then I would build towards getting that job
Mm,
versus diving into it now and getting all cluttered with these super early thinking.
yeah.
But I don't know that that's really very practical advice.
But the Nielsen Norman 1992 set of 12, there's 10 or 12 heuristics. I can't remember. I would hazard a guess that you feel that they still apply.
100%. I've created like 13. I'm working on heuristics for Web3, which
Yeah, yeah,
I'll
yeah. I
link
saw
to.
your questions in
That'd be
the
cool. I'd really
masterclass.
like to
Actually,
see
Yeah.
that.
that was
I
great.
mean,
Yeah,
they're very rough. My first impression is if you can't at least satisfy the 1994 list, you've got a lot of work to do.
yeah.
And I mean, those are the most basic things of people working with technology. Like, does it make sense? Are you helping them prevent errors? I mean,
Mm,
come on. If you're not doing that, it's like, do you have a car with a seatbelt or doors? No. Well, go back to the drawing board and then come back in a couple of weeks and talk to me. Right. Once you have the wheels and the doors and the seatbelt, then there's a bunch of other stuff that you can start thinking about and improving on. And there's going to be tons of work to do there and it's going to be fun. But
but
everybody's
there's
going to have to
definitely,
get over themselves. So Web3 people are going to have to get over themselves being so fancy and
yeah,
technical. We, the design community, are going to have to get over ourselves being so annoyed by them, me included. I'm the most annoyed, but I'm
yeah.
making it work. So if I can make it work, right?
Well, that's it. And there's definitely parallels, right? Like, between, the experience that we've had with Web3 and now this. And so it's, yeah, look, this has been a great conversation,
Oh,
Tamra. And
fun.
I have a sense that if I can convince you to join us again, that we will have a lot more to talk about. I've got some ideas. So, yeah, look, everybody who's watching, check the show notes. Have a look at Tamara's book that she co-authored, Persona
Well,
Life Cycle.
or just go to my website, adlininc.com it's good. It's currently it's articles, but it's going to be content.
Okay, sure, sure,
That's the
excellent.
latest stuff.
Okay, cool, awesome. We'll go to Tamara's website, and yeah, and thank you for tuning in.
And thanks for the
Thank
chance
you.
to bend your ear. This has been
This is
super fun, and I'm honored to be included. Thank you.
thanks.